As model railroaders, we enjoy showing our work to our friends. This layout tour is another chance to be part of that enjoyment. Our 6 featured layouts are the pride of their builders. All the major scales are here, HO, O, N, and S. One of the layouts features Colorado narrow gauge and another Pennsylvania narrow gauge. Our first layout is the domain of the Tuesday Night Choir Boys. This informal group of modelers built the HO scale Atlantic and Western of Rick Shoup. The narrow gauge on this layout is modeled after the East Broad Top. The Scenic and Undecided is a physics teacher's dream. Rick Spano and his wife Linda have created a spectacular N-scale world of animation. The layout is also a reminder of places they've lived. The Denver and Western of Gordon North is basically a loop with lots of beautiful scenery to enjoy. The ON 2.5 layout combines a touch of New England with Colorado mountains. The O-scale Canandaigua Southern of master track planner John Armstrong is not a test bed for his ideas, but it's a mechanical engineer's model railroad designed for operation. S-scale is much more than American Flyer, as Sam Powell's Pin Creek Valley will show you. Sam and his wife Elaine are 2 well-known S-scale modelers. Big-time urban scenery is the hallmark of the Severna Park Model Railroad Club. The HO-scale Chesapeake and Allegheny has more scenery than track, but not all of it's urban. Rural scenes are not neglected. The fellowship of a group called the Tuesday Night Choir Boys is more important to Rick Shoup than operating his layout. This group helps build and maintain his HO-scale Atlantic and Western Railway, but they're also his friends. Hi, Rick.
Oh, hi, Alan. How you doing?
Good. Is the Tuesday Night Choir Boys a club?
No, it's a group of individuals that come over here on Wednesday nights because they can't meet on Tuesday nights.
The Atlantic and Western has a minimum radius of 28 inches. The narrow gauge Everett, Burnham, and Tuscarora has a 12-inch minimum radius. The track is flex and hand-laid in code 70 and 100. The turnouts are built to fit the location. Bench work is 4-inch wooden I-beams, and the maximum grade is 2%. Both the HO and HON3 railroads take up a 16 by 16-foot area in the basement.
Alan, the railroad comes out of the 2 tunnels here in Blacklog Mountain. The dual gauge goes across the pair of bridges along the outskirts of the fair town of Garbersburg at Mary's Fine Foods, and you can see Ed Sylvia and I waving to you from the front porch, and goes to the engine facility at Garbersburg. The standard gauge Atlantic and Western comes along the water level route into the interchange at Garbersburg with the New York Central and the Pennsylvania, past the Garbersburg station and around the curve along the edge of the Susquehanna River to Flagstop. As the narrow gauge railroad passes by the engine facility at Garbersburg, it goes alongside the small town of Whiskey Hollow through the S-curve and into the interchange at Clarksville. The standard gauge on the lower level passes by the water tower and up to the small station at Flagstop. The standard gauge railroad comes out of the tunnel through Short Gap Junction and ducks back into the tunnel on its way to Miller's Gold Quarry. The narrow gauge comes across the top by the reversing loop and the division tower into the town of Clarksville, where it interchanges with the Miller's Gold Quarry narrow gauge railroad and the Atlantic and Western. The standard gauge railroad comes out of the tunnel from Short Gap Junction around Melander's Curve along the edge of Licking Creek and goes back into the blasted rock tunnels and off camera around to its originating location at Garbersburg. The narrow gauge railroad comes from the town of Clarksville around the curve past the water tank and the small engine facility at Miller's Quarry, where there is a narrow gauge mic on the turntable, passes alongside of the quarry where you see the crane working and the 060 tank switcher waiting, and into the tunnel portal. The other side of the tunnel portal is the backside of Clarksville. It passes along and then goes back to the town of Garbersburg.
Is the railroad based on a particular location or locations?
Yes. It's loosely based on Pennsylvania in the Mount Union area This layout depicts Monday, July 14th, 1947, between 2 and 5 p.m.
You are obviously a fan of the East Broad Top.
Yes.
So you had to have narrow gauge on the layout as well as the standard gauge. How do you operate the narrow gauge?
It started out merely as an afterthought. The whole thing was going to be only standard gauge, and then I became involved with and invented the Friends of the East Broad Top. So then we just put in the dual gauge up there. And I'd kind of wanted to have it. And just like every piece of narrow gauge, it just keeps on growing.
Hobby fellowship is very important to you, I know.
Yes, it is.
And is that more important than operating the railroad?
Yes. We have a crew that meets here on Wednesday nights. It's called the Tuesday Night Choir Boys, who meet on Wednesday nights. And many is the month that goes by, and we merely show slides. Occasionally we go down and run the trains, and most of the time we bat the breeze here and swap sea stories with each other. It's very loose. This organization, this Tuesday Night Choir Boys, that's another name that just happened after I read the book, The Choir Boys, and decided that this group of individuals was at least as flaky as the group that was in that book, and it gives us a way to unwind.
How much of the layout did you build?
Well, Ed Sylvia and I built all the bench work and laid most of the track, and there's one little place down there in Short Gap Junction where I did the scenery, and then Bill and Mary Miller did the other 90% of the layout.
What materials did they use for the scenery, the Millers?
Densite for the plaster.
What's densite?
Densite is a patented stuff like hydrocal in strength and hardness, but it sets up slower. It stays plastic about 8 minutes. Densite sets in about 4. So the densite in the plastic stage enables you to do a lot more carving. It accepts watercolor and oil color better, more readily than hydrocal.
Who did your backdrops?
Mary Miller did that backdrop. That's an acrylic backdrop on masonite with Sears crystal blue first. And the seams were done just normally like you would drywall.
What have you learned from this railroad, building and running it?
An awful lot of frustration, an awful lot of very much fellowship and enjoyment of how men interact with each other when they are involved in doing something that they can see an immediate result. That's what a model railroad is. Most men today push paper, and consequently they don't really see an end result. And with a model railroad, you can build something and you can see it right then, and then if it isn't right, you can take it apart and do it again. I'm trying to portray a day in history, and that's what I'm doing.
Thanks, Rick.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. It's been a pleasure having you come today.
It seems that model railroading is a very social activity for you, a chance to get away from work.
Yeah, that's true. The men who meet here on Wednesday nights, they do it so that they can go back into the realm and the world of their childhood.
Great. See you.
Goodbye.
Rick Spano is a high school physics teacher who has sort of brought his work home to his model railroad. Rick has 7 animated scenes on his N-scale Scenic and Undecided. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Alan. How are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Animation is unusual in any scale, but in N-scale it would seem impossible.
It's a little difficult, but with a little creativity, we can solve some of the problems.
Rick has been in the hobby off and on since he was 14. His wife, Linda, has shared the fun of railroading since their marriage. The N-scale Scenic and Undecided has a minimum radius of 18 inches with flex track and a maximum grade of 8%. The layout is built on L-girder benchwork. The 15 by 36-foot layout is loosely based on the kind of scenery covered by the Canadian Pacific and the Burlington Northern.
Alan, to the far west of the layout is the town of Scenic. It's the railroad gets its name. The other side of Pysex Peak is the coal mine called Coburn Mine. And just adjacent to that is the rip-off taconite mine. Farther west is the Anacron town, and it's a little small Midwest town. Beyond that, you can see the engine facilities and the turntable of the Anacron yard. The Anacron yard is farther west, and adjacent to it is the S&U rotary car dumper. Right now, it's loading an ore boat. After leaving Anacron, we pass through the Wisconsin Dells on the way to Multi-City. In the foreground is a circus train unloading in the town of Undecided. In the background is Multi-City itself, a composite city of Chicago, Milwaukee, and Duluth. In the foreground again is Port Allen, which is an industrial city having an operating bridge crane. Beyond that is the passenger terminal at Lalby. Lalby is a small town based upon Princeton, New Jersey. After leaving Lalby, we enter Canada via this tunnel. A little further along, we reach Field, which is the interchange between the Burlington Northern and the Canadian Pacific. The Burlington Northern passes Field and doubles back on itself to go back to Anacron. The Canadian Pacific leaves Field Yard and skirts the Columbia River, heading towards the Fraser Canyon in British Columbia. After leaving the Columbia River area, we come out of Yale Tunnel and cross the Fraser River. We parallel the Fraser River along the Helper Grade, pass under a stone arch bridge at Big Hill, and proceed under the Field Bridge at Great Divide. We cross the Kicking Horse River and proceed on to Ashcroft. Ashcroft is a desert area and a copper mining district. We are crossing the Thompson River, and shortly after that we'll cross the Fraser River again on a stone arch bridge. The grade is much gentler now, and we are still gaining some elevation as we go through the spiral tunnel and finally reach Great Divide, the layout's highest point, and then eventually get to North Justice. Alan, we're just leaving North Justice and passing on the overhead trackage over Port Allen, and beyond that is Multi-City. We're going through some hidden trackage and around Pysek's Peak down to Anacron, which is our terminus.
You've sort of based your layout on the territory covered by Canadian Pacific and the Burlington Northern, yet you have scenes from areas that you've lived in the country. How did you combine those?
Originally, the area was supposed to be from the Great Lakes to the northwest, and the reason for doing it that way is I particularly like greenery scenery, and I got enthralled with the Burlington Northern and its antecedents. Mm-hmm. And we tried to tie it in with those areas. And mm-hmm. then a couple of years ago, we went to Canada, and we were in the Pacific Northwest in British Columbia, and I fell in love with the scenery out there.
Yeah. Is model railroading just a method of tying your scenes together?
To some degree, yes. It's also a very, very strong social force for my wife and I.
Well, are the individual scenes more important to you than the overall railroad?
No, I think the overall railroad and the overall scene is important to me. I guess I use a railroad as a media to do three-dimensional art. I think since I was very, very young, if I saw something I liked, a city or a town, I'd always want to model it and build it, even if I built it out of toothpicks and pieces of wood. And I think my hopes and dreams are far beyond my actual physical capability.
It appears your scenery was influenced by John Allen, and you have some areas named after parts on his layout. Why was that?
He probably influenced me more than any other modeler in terms of scenery building and overall philosophy in model railroading.
You have wonderful scenery. What are your techniques, and what materials do you use?
I like hydrocal an awful lot. I've used that because I enjoy rock faces and rock casting. I like the outdoors, and I like to have a mental image of it, and the railroad scenery allows me to do that. Although, I guess in the past 4 or 5 years, I've used Sculptamold a lot. It's not used for the rock casting. It's used primarily as filler and to help it fix up roadbed area and to give an overall earthy appearance to the scenery.
Speaking of scenery, one of the unusual features of the layout, you built the scenery first in the new area and then laid the track. Did this cause you any problems?
Yes. I've always wanted to do that because of a photo that John Allen took and showed part of his layout with ties sitting on the
Yeah.
roadbed without the track. And
Yeah.
I thought that would be an interesting way of doing that.
Would you do it again that way?
I'd do some that way. If you have time to plan and spend on design, it's probably better to have all your track work and all your wiring done and all the bugs out of it. Being a physics teacher has helped me out in doing the electrical part and the electronic aspects of it. Mm-hmm. It has also assisted me in planning some of the animation designs.
Let's talk about the operating rotary dump. How does that function?
Table that the hopper car rests upon is raised and rotated. The car engages a clamp, and the clamp is attached to a counterweight which locks the car in place. So it doesn't matter what the size or height of the car is, it automatically locks, and the car can be turned almost completely over and dump its contents.
How does the overhead crane work?
That has 4 motors which perform 4 functions. One motor drives the crane to and fro. Another motor drives the trolley or control car that has the bucket. And 2 other motors operate the bucket. One lowers both cables on the bucket so the bucket goes up and down just as you would on a prototype. The other cable pulls the center sheave on the pulley, and changing the slack in that opens and closes the bucket.
Probably the most spectacular is the 4th of July fireworks display. Take us through the operation of that.
We have a mechanism, and a horn rises up and down that pulls the fiber optics together. When the horn rises, it pulls them together, and the lights are off. When the horn drops down to a lower position rather rapidly, the prongs of the fiber optics just fall and spread out, and at the same time the lights are turned on. They're tied together through an electrical switch that runs on a wheel, so the wheel actually causes the horn to go up and down, and it also turns the lights on. There's a color disc underneath that rotates with various color gels, and the light goes through the gels and travels through the fiber optics and comes out the ends.
Your wife, Linda, is also very interested in the hobby. Was she interested before you got married or after you got married?
I think she was more interested in railroading. She's made me a rail fan more than anything else. And she's been my chief critic. She sort of presses me to improve something when I say it's usually good enough, and it really isn't. She has also designed some of the circuitry on the Anacron yard, the logic system.
But it's a big help having a wife who's helpful in the hobby, isn't it?
Oh, it surely is. I don't know how she puts up with some of the shenanigans I...
What should people remember about your railroad?
Oh, I hope that they enjoy the scenery and the animation. I think one of the reasons I build the railroad is to share with others some of the enjoyment I get of looking at the real world about me.
I can't decide which is more spectacular, the scenery or the animation.
I have a hard time picking my favorite, too.
Thanks, Rick. See you.
It was good seeing you.
Beautiful scenery is also one of the features of Gordon North's Denver and Western. This ON 2.5 layout can make some great sounds, though. Gordon has been tinkering with authentic locomotive sound since 1972. Hi, Gordon.
Hi, Al. How you doing?
Good. Do you think sound is the ultimate bit of realism?
Well, it is for me. It's really increased my interest in the hobby.
Gordon has been a model railroader for over 20 years, but the O-scale Denver and Western is his first real layout. It features hand-laid Code 100 track and turnouts on individual wood ties with a minimum radius of 24 inches. The ON 2.5 layout sort of grew as Gordon's interest grew. Even though the layout is complete, Gordon continues to make changes. The 13 by 25-foot layout fills a scratch-built basement.
We'll start our tour here at Tacoma Junction. This is the stamp mill, company houses, forms a stamp mill complex. Here's the station and the Tacoma Hotel. There's a small engine facility here for gear locomotives and small diesels. There's a large factory there, the millwork factory. Far end of town is the small maintenance away facility. Main line passes out past the far edge of town, the company store, goes out in the mountain areas, over the river, and through the tunnel on its way over to Gold Hill. First thing you come to is the mine at Gold Hill, and then the main line loops completely loops the town of Gold Hill. The town, this is a new area I'm working on, and I've only got about half the buildings in here right now. The far end of town, you pass the station, swing out across the river, back through some mountainous area and into the town of Tonopah, where the major engine facilities are. The town of Tonopah is actually down the road past the car shops. Main line swings alongside the engine facilities, eventually crosses the Howe Truss Bridge, back through some more pretty rugged mountainous area, and gets back to the town of Tacoma Junction where we started out.
You started out modeling the East, but wound up including Colorado. How did that happen?
Well, actually, I first started building ON 30 in 1952 or 3, something like that, because I saw an article from Hugh Boutel, and he was building a larger scale of Eastern type things, a larger scale with, I think it was like HO, but it wasn't, you know, the article didn't really make that clear, but anyway, it was a larger scale and running 2 foot, and I just decided that I would go ahead and build a 1/4 inch Eastern narrow gauge on the HO track. But then I got to travel to the West, fell in love with Western type narrow gauge, and things have just kind of shifted in that direction now.
You're more interested in building models than any other facet of the hobby.
That's right. That's
What? Tell me about that. What is it you get out of the model building?
Well, I think I like to essentially design, create the model. Not, you know, I don't build a model of anything. I build the model I want, whether it be a locomotive or a structure. Except for one locomotive, those are all scratch built.
How much of the layout is scratch built?
Well, really all of it. I just do what I like, and some, you know, that layout has actually been worked on for 20 years now. Oh, there's been continual changes. Every time I kind of get to where it's kind of getting finished, I'll rip out something and do something.
Start again.
Yeah, because, you know, things you did yesterday, you can always do better tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right, you can. Do you have any special structure building techniques?
Well, I really like brick buildings, and I've come across a material called chipboard, 3-ply chipboard that's 8-inch thick that you can saw. And so it's very easy to use. So I build basically a box from that chipboard and cover it with Hal Reynolds, Hogate and Reynolds brick. Then I also do a lot of like barn board type building, where I'll build up you know, sides, and in some cases a 2x4, you know, a framed wall section, and just cover it with barn board siding that I cut. So again, very, very cheap and inexpensive. And
the result is great, though. How do you weather the structures?
Most of my weathering is really done by airbrush. I'll, like if it's a barn board building, I stain, you know, stain all the wood first, so it's all essentially weathered, and then when it's painted, generally with more of a stain than a full paint, it looks kind of weathered right there.
Yeah.
Then I'll just tone things around with airbrush. The structures, I'll use pastels. Chalks also, but the basic, you know, like 75% of the weathering is with the airbrush.
Why is authentic sound so important to you?
First time I heard it, I think it was about 1972. I said, hey, that's all right. So I designed my own system right then and there, had something running in about 3 months, and really the sound has really increased my interest in the hobby and running and the running quality. I had to remotor everything. That's what got me into micromotors. Right now, in fact, I just finished a new one of my own design to kind of match up with the PFM. So right now mine is, I have a PFM and a railcar sound system that goes along with it, and then my own combination steam railcar unit.
Do you use any unusual techniques to build your scenery? It's awfully nice.
Well, I've kind of settled down on just you know, screen wire and hydrocal.
What about the coloring?
Coloring is all rocks are all stains, you know, washes of. I've used both oil washes and acrylic washes at various times. And
Ground foam.
lots of ground foam and decomposed granite.
Is the layout mainly a means of creating scenes and things that appeal to you?
Yeah, I think I look at that whole layout as just a series of interconnected scenes.
What do you get out of model railroading?
Well, I get the relaxation and enjoyment. I don't do anything if I don't enjoy it. That's why I say I only do freelancing. I build what I want to build when I want to build it. And of course, the social aspects. All of my friends, people that I respect and admire, are in the hobby.
Thanks, Gordon. I really like the way you've used the mountains as a transition between your scenes.
Well, I really fell in love with the Colorado scenery, even though I'm from the East.
Take care. See you.
Okay.
For another kind of mountain railroading, we're going to visit John Armstrong's Canandaigua Southern. This O-scale layout has some fairly steep grades, but one of the grades is a bit unusual. Hi, John.
Oh, hi, Alan.
What kind of grade is your vertical turnout?
Well, when it's in the up position, it's about 2.5%. When it's down, it's maybe 1.5%. And if I didn't have it at all, it would be 8%.
John's O-scale Canandaigua Southern has a minimum radius of 54 inches and a maximum grade of 3.5%. The track is hand-laid, codes 125 and 172, and the turnouts are built in place to fit the location. John has been in the hobby since 1937. The loop-to-loop layout fills John's 34 by 24-foot basement.
We start our tour here at the east end of the railroad, where there are 3 hidden layover tracks inside a loop. This represents both the Canandaigua Southern and the Erie-Lackawanna. They come together in an unscenic area at Essex Junction, and then the double track serving both railroads continues through a tunnel into Burge. Burge is where the iron ore comes off the branch onto the main line. Then we swing into a 288-inch strictly cosmetic curve along the foot of the limestone cliffs and alongside Lake Ripley and past Slug Island there in the river, and continue on through another tunnel into Warm River, which is so named because the hot water heater is immediately behind the backdrop. At this point, we enter another tunnel and proceed through an unscenic area of the railroad through gas meter sag, which is so named because we had to sag to get clearance underneath the gas meter. We continue across the Pennsylvania-Buffalo line. At this point, we have come around from Dunallen to the east end of Cattaraugus. Cattaraugus is the division point on the Canandaigua Southern, at which trains coming from the Erie-Lackawanna and from the New York Central connection by way of Canandaigua are classified and consolidated to go up over the mountains to Pittsburgh. The engine terminal here is very busy because the light locomotive power, which is adequate for the relatively level terrain to the east, must be replaced with heavy engines and pushers provided to go up the hill. At this point, we have come from Cattaraugus through a largely unscenic area up through Hernial Tunnel, past Ott Dam and Uckla, and all mine, primarily on double track on separated grades, through Coldwater Flats and Aikenback and over High Trestle into Alta Pass. At this point, the trains move through the last of the visible portion of the main line into this tunnel and on into the reverted loop, which represents the termination of their run at Pittsburgh.
As the hobby's most famous track planner, you chose to model the Canandaigua Southern, a fictitious railroad. What's the reason for that?
Well, basically, I think cowardice. I wanted to stay far enough away from reality so that I wouldn't be trying to model actual locales.
You've always stressed prototype practices in your articles. How have you carried that over to the layout?
I think mostly by making this a bridge route, where primarily the traffic comes in one end and goes out the other end of the railroad. And that's because in model railroading, we have to have traffic density that is really very high by prototype standards.
Is there some reason for not completing the scenery yet?
Yes, inertia and a relatively lower priority than some of the other things that come along.
You're not in any hurry to finish the layout.
If I am, it's not apparent, and it wouldn't do much good.
The layout runs from western New York through the Allegheny Mountains to Pittsburgh, and that's the bridge route concept that you were referring to earlier. How does all of that fit together, and why that locale?
Well, in the first place, I grew up in Canandaigua, and that's sort of where we had to start from. We had two largest railroads in the country there, the New York Central and the Pennsylvania, but they were both on branch lines. And Pittsburgh was a logical location for generating a lot of traffic.
How did you go about planning the layout?
Well, I did work out a hypothetical route which used pieces of various existing lines but made numerous improvements naturally, many of which would not in practice be for real. And of course, from a modeling standpoint, I wanted to have both some relatively level track and a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And this required bending the junior out of the Allegheny Mountains.
You wanted walk around, didn't you?
Yes.
Back when you did the layout. And that layout was planned in the 50s, the early 50s.
Planned in 1950.
That was kind of a novel concept, as have been most of your concepts for track planning. Very innovative things that you have come up with, or adapted from maybe someone.
Well, it certainly is not a new concept, and how, whether you have it or not, depends really on how essential you think it is. I have the feeling that if the train is running and you can't look at it, you're wasting its time. I wanted to avoid backtracking. That is, I wanted to be able to follow the train from one end of the visible route to the other.
Do you consider the layout a test bed for your ideas?
No, not really. I built it to have a railroad, and of course, this forces you to test the ideas.
Well, what about the reverted loop that represents Pittsburgh? Were you a little leery about that when you started?
I was certainly a little leery about it, and because of the general desire to build the railroad from the bottom up rather than the top down, which is a very sound concept, that was not completed in operation for about 8 years. But it turned out to be completely satisfactory, in fact, much more satisfactory than I anticipated.
How does the reverted loop work?
Well, it involves disappearing into a tunnel, in this case, clearing a turnout at the side of a loop, backing through that turnout in hidden trackage to a tail track, or a series of tail tracks, 3 in this case, then coming out by the other side of this loop and emerging from the same tunnel that you went in, all turned around and ready to go back.
One of the things you've advocated over the years is loads out, empties in operation. You've just added that to your layout. How does it work?
In this case, we have it in rather large scale because we're talking about full trains of iron ore. And the arrangement that was necessary to bring the concept into reality was rather heroic because it involved putting another layer of railroad in between 2 existing layers of railroad. The vertical turnout let us connect these 2 ends of the problem with a way that would meet the situation. Without it, we would have had an 8% grade with loaded ore cars running down it with gay abandon.
What's the Eugene O'Neill machine?
That is simply a automatic dimmer, which is intended to create a long day's journey into night. It's not all that long. It takes about 2.5 minutes to go from daylight to dark.
You're considered a serious model railroader by everybody in the hobby, I think, but you don't let that get in the way of having fun. You have a marvelous sense of humor, and that's evident just by the signs that are on the layout.
Well, I've found that signs are vastly easier and quicker than actually doing something. And since we're, 20, 30 years behind in our master plan, why, any little help I can get, that's what I'm going to do. So you want to concentrate on the things that will give you the most pleasure for the least pain. Of course, you don't really know what this is till after you've done it.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, thinking may help, but it certainly has not been successful in predicting.
John, what have you gotten out of the hobby after having given so much to it?
Oh, I've gotten all kinds of good things. I've got trains I can play with.
And friends.
Plus a bunch of friends that I don't think you could find in any other particular brand of nuttiness.
Canandaigua Southern steam engines are really impressive in O-scale.
Yeah, there's nothing like 25 pounds to get your attention.
Thank you, John. Bye.
Bye now.
The next smaller scale can have some impressive locomotives, too, as Sam Powell's S-scale layout will show you. The Pin Creek Valley is not all it appears to be in 1/64th size. Hi, Sam.
Well, hello, Alan. How are you?
Good. Since S-scale is smaller than O-scale and larger than HO, I bet you were able to combine elements of all of these scales.
In many instances, HO buildings are useful for the background scenes, and some O-scale products are useful for foreground scenes.
Sam's S-scale Pin Creek Valley has hand-laid Code 100 track and turnouts. The minimum radius is 45 inches, and the maximum grade is 3%. Sam started in N-scale and changed to S in the late 1960s. His wife, Elaine, is also involved in the hobby as editor of an S-gauge newsletter. The U-shaped layout is 20 by 20 feet and is designed for continuous running.
Alan, this is the western terminal of the Pin Creek Valley. This is the locomotive servicing facilities for Pittstown and the Pittstown Terminal. The main terminal, which is not modeled, is back underneath that tunnel there. The first stop out of the big city is the 25th Street station. Trains come out of there and join the main line with the yard lead joining the main line just east of the highway plate girder bridge. Now we're headed east out of Pittstown towards Benville on the main line. Benville is the first town, 3,000 or 4,000 people, a few small industries, a box factory, a farmer's supply, a small station, kit-patched version of a smaller station. There the trains go into a tunnel and disappear from view as they're headed towards St. Anne further east. St. Anne is the home of the Black Diamond Mine, Powell Piano Manufacturing Company, the Weekly Herald, a number of small tenements, a bottling plant, a Sears warehouse, Schumacher Mill and Grain, and a quaint Victorian station. Continuing east out of St. Anne's, we pass through a tunnel and find ourselves in the small town of Elizabeth. This mountain burg has a small population, seen very little growth in the past, and we'll see very little in the future. One small industry. Trains leaving Elizabeth travel east across Mount Summit and loop around behind Pittstown into Leetown, a small burg served by 4 or 5 local industries. Trains then continue east on into Mount Pleasant, which at this point is just a siding and a crossroads. Future development will take place here. Trains pass through 2 tunnels and arrive at the Pin Creek Valley yards at Connellsville. Staging tracks are behind the mountain where trains are turned and headed back west to Pittstown. Interchange takes place with the Western Maryland, B&O, and Allegheny Midland here. A small locomotive servicing facility with a coal dock, a small turntable, and a station for local service are located just beyond the yard.
What's the basis for your railroad's location?
Mid-Pennsylvania, west enough to be into the more rugged scenery, but east enough to be into the soft coal area.
And what prototype do you follow?
Pennsylvania Railroad with a little smattering of B&O and Reading, and then sort of hand-me-down this and that for the home road.
How did you get into S-scale?
When I was at a hobby shop, I saw an S-gauge train car on the shelf. I was shopping N-gauge, and my wife was with me. She still had the patience to travel with me to hobby shops at that point.
It does take patience.
And I asked the manager to look at it, and Elaine said, "What are you going to do with that?" And I said, "I don't know. I might build a model railroad."
How did you use HO buildings for S-scale?
Usually, you have to replace the door, and you have to put a foundation on the bottom of it. And then, if you're fortunate enough to have a building that's got tall floors anyway in HO, you can put it up close to the front. If you don't have that kind of a structure, you have to put it to the back.
The technique you use to get a rundown appearance on the layout is kind of unusual, where you paint everything black first.
That's the approach to theater. Anything, you start out black, and then you paint what you want people to see.
You do this to figures as well, is that?
Everything, locomotives, cars, structures. Now, if I were painting a building, I would airbrush it black.
Uh-huh.
And then I would airbrush what would be the darkest color that would be a blend of the basic color. If it were a brown building, I would go down to the darkest brown, but I wouldn't airbrush it right on flat so that the deepest crevices were black. And then I'd come back with a lighter color. I might paint a structure 3 or 4 times, or a car or anything, going through the colors so that I end up with the lightest color, finally, sprayed from above. And it just highlights everything and makes it have more form and more depth. Plus, it makes everything look a little dirty.
I understand that at one time you were a real detail hound, or a rivet counter. What changed your attitudes?
Let's see, I guess the thing that changed my approach to that was 2 kids, a business that I own and run, and a layout about 3 times the size of what I originally had. I just got too many concerns in life to worry about how many rivets were on the side of anything.
Your wife, Elaine, is very interested in model railroading, along with you. How has that worked out in practice?
Elaine is a promoter of the hobby because it's a hobby. And she thinks that's really important. She feels that that is one of the most important things a person can have and needs to have. They owe it to themselves to have something that they look forward to doing almost every day. And if they don't have some little thing that's just for them, little thing, I say, if they don't have some little thing just for them, that kind of adds that special little spark to their life. They're in danger of becoming, losing perspective on life. She's a tremendous cheerleader. I mean, you know, she's really valuable to me. She has, I ask her all the time, how do you like this, or how do you like that? You think this building should be here, or do you think this building should be there? Or should it be lighter color, or should it be a darker color? And I consider her artistic eye valuable and her counsel important. I don't always pay attention to what she says, but...
What do you get out of model railroading?
I just love modeling anything. And model railroading is neat because it's a diverse modeling thing that allows you to express yourself in a very, very complete way. I would say that the most notable accomplishment of the model railroad for me right now was the fact that it was built in S-gauge when virtually nothing was available in S-gauge. So S-gauge was a natural for me because I just wanted to be different. I just wanted it to look unique. Now that I've gone through that, and it's been 15 years of being different and unique, S-gauge is there's a big change in S-gauge, because S-gauge is now becoming available to people that can't model scratch building and don't have the imagination to do the kit bashing. At this point, it wouldn't matter to me if I was in S-gauge or N-gauge or LBG or whatever. It's still the same thing.
Sam, your city really looks like people live there. You've combined elements from several scales very effectively.
Thank you, Alan. That observation really shows that you don't have to scratch build everything to have a successful model railroad in S-gauge.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Urban scenery is big on the Severna Park Model Railroad Club. The HO scale Chesapeake and Allegheny Railroad has an eastern port city that can be confused for Baltimore. Logan Holtgrew is the club's chief structure builder. Hi, Logan.
Hi, Alan. Welcome to Severna Park.
Thanks. What's the fascination with urban scenery?
Well, I think buildings in an urban setting really set a scene, and I think they're an excellent means of capturing the mood and time of a place, and we're very high on that here in Severna Park.
The HO scale Chesapeake and Allegheny features hand-laid track and turnouts in code 70 and 100. The maximum grade is 3%. The minimum radius on the main line is 34 inches, and on the branch line, 24 inches. The layout is loosely based on the Baltimore and Ohio and the Western Maryland. The 12 by 36-foot layout is located in a former station of the Baltimore and Annapolis Railroad.
Alan, this is Chesapeake City, which is the metropolis of our layout. It's fashioned roughly after the city of Baltimore, Maryland, and indeed many of the buildings here are rough approximations of buildings in the city of Baltimore. As we move to the left, a large warehouse here hides an access hole where the operator of the yard in front of us can stand and run the yard and put the various trains together. As we go along over here further to the left, we have a natural gas tank, and then the large roundhouse, and the coaling and watering facilities for our steam engines, and then we have a diesel fueling facility there as well. As we get into the foreground area, this is a passenger station, marble, not any given prototype, perhaps somewhat after Pennsylvania Station in Baltimore. In the very foreground, we have our rotary coal dump, which is the end point of our coaling operation, which is so important on our layout. To the right behind you here is an area that we're particularly pleased with. This is an exact duplication of an intersection in Baltimore in the waterfront area called Fells Point. As we leave Chesapeake, we move along through the yard throat of the passenger station and move into the area of rural Maryland, which is somewhat fashioned after Howard County. And this leads us into the area of Colton Junction. Here in Colton Junction, the branch line splits off of the main. The main line heads straight ahead across a very narrow steel trestle over a deep gorge, and then heads down through a cut into a tunnel beneath the mountain. Our main line then reappears on a double-track bridge, which leads into Potomac Junction. Here, the yard leads of the classification yard at Brunswick join the main line. Behind the complex of double-slip switches stands a row of industrial buildings, which also hide the mantel and fireplace in the wall of the building which houses our club layout. The last building in line in this complex is the Pittsburgh Steel Company office building, which is the nerve center of Pittsburgh Steel's Brunswick Works. The open hearth furnaces, seen in line here, are situated next to the towering blast furnaces, which are associated with hot air ovens on either side. At the extreme end of the complex are the facilities for handling of the raw materials of steelmaking, iron ore, coke, and limestone. Here at Colton Junction, you'll remember that the branch line leaves the main and then heads across a wooden trestle up the mountain to Colton. Here we wanted to create in miniature a typical Western Maryland coal mining community. A complex of support structures stand next to the coal tipple and framehead which dominate the community. Along the single street, there's a line of commercial buildings, and at the periphery of town, there's a small colonial white church which stands next to a curved trestle which carries the branch line up the mountain towards Yoho. The terminus of the branch line is Yoho. Here there is a second coal mine, and in addition to this, a small passenger station. This serves the Yoho Springs Hotel and Spa.
Well, how did the club come up with the name Chesapeake and Allegheny?
The members were interested in an Eastern-type prototype, and we felt that since we lived on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay that these names, Chesapeake and Allegheny, would be appropriate.
The layout seems to run from Chesapeake City to the Appalachians. Is that?
That's correct. In fact, we rather depict this as Maryland in miniature. Chesapeake City, roughly fashioned after the city of Baltimore. The mountainous area, such as western Maryland, out around Cumberland, in that part of our state. We wanted to have a realistic layout that, when viewed from the center aisle, would really convince the viewer that this was a true scene. We didn't want a spaghetti bowl of track that can occur in a club, yet we wanted operation. We hoped to hit a happy medium with perhaps some emphasis on realism and scenery, particularly urban scenery, which was what we really wanted to get into, to model an eastern metropolis.
Of course, they called on you for that, and you're really the resident's urban scenery expert, I guess. What's the appeal of that for you?
I wanted to be an architect, and somehow I got deviated and went into medicine instead, and I suppose I'm taking out my architectural frustrations in building models. Yes, the scenery and the structures and bridges have been more or less my forte in the club over the years.
I'm going to ask you to be modest here, but would you say that the structures are the layout's best features?
Well, I couldn't possibly answer that for fear of being stoned by my colleagues in the club. They have accused me of running a diorama, which of course isn't true at all. We do have trains they do run.
The buildings all look so real, and certainly the club is famous for the urban scenery. Is there a secret to building that type of scenery?
Subtle coloring, I think, is the key, perhaps. Anything that we look at in miniature, our mind's eye would tell us is a great distance away, and structures that are a distance away tend to have a subtle pastel shade rather than sharp, severe colors, because the particular matter, even in the clearest air, shades them into a grayish hue. So I've made an effort over the years to try and keep the colors subtle and to use subtle weathering and emphasize weathering. In fact, the color splotch from any of the commercial paints, if held against the side of a railroad car, would be the proper color, but that would be the improper color when viewed from a distance where the car would be that size. So this has been written up in Model Railroader and other sources that it's important to keep one's colors obtunded and down and to the grayish blue side. And of course, the further away the object is, the more gray that building should be. Club President Sam Shepard and I have collaborated over the 20 years of the history of this club. And we would go out to Baltimore with camera and view the area and take photographs and select various buildings. And in the Chesapeake City area, we actually planned that with pasteboard mock-ups, and we would put them up in place and get a perspective of what the area would look like. And we have selectively gotten smaller towards the photographic backdrop. Another of our club members, Bill Klang, is a professional photographer, took the backdrop, and then I tinted it with pastel colors. And starting from about midway back in the scene, we gauged the buildings down, becoming smaller and smaller, back to the size of the backdrop itself, to give the illusion of distance.
Well, talking about special tricks that you use here, you've got a TV camera and a TV set. What's the purpose of that?
It's mounted on the ceiling of the layout and aims down at the track pattern of the city of Colton. And there is a control panel beneath the layout and an operating panel for the coal tipple as well. The coal tipple has a dual panel, one inside the benchwork underneath the layout and one in front. So during regular meetings, we operate this area, of course, from the aisle, but at showtime, why, we get beneath and have the operator run it from television. The visitor, as he comes along, will stand and watch the train run, and the coal tipple shoots lower and coal dispensed into the cars, and then the train pull away without ever being touched by human hand, and they are mystified by this. It's very interesting.
One other bit of animation that you have on the railroad is a rotary coal dump. How does that work?
The rotor works with compressed air, which through a series of pistons and clamps holds the car onto the track, and then an electric motor turns the rotor, emptying the car into a scale model intercoastal coal lighter or small ship. And then the car is turned back to neutral. The clamps are released, and it runs through a series of switchbacks and drops some 10 or 11 inches down to the lower level, where the empties are then hauled away back to the main and back to the tipple to be refilled again.
How many members do you have in the club?
We have about 25, of which perhaps 15 or so are rather active, and others are intermittently active.
Is it kind of an informal group?
Very informal. I don't know of any group that is more informal. We never have elections. We never have business meetings. We never have committees. We just
No politics?
No politics. We just play trains. I think we've had the same president for 18 years, and no one's ever asked for an election.
The layout is located in the former Baltimore and Annapolis Railroad Station. How did that come about, Logan?
The station became available to us in 1966 after having a rather checkered and varied career. We think it's an ideal and rather fitting location for a model railroad layout.
Sure. Would you advise other clubs to do the same?
Well, if available, we're very fortunate here, and we have a very good relationship with the community, and we have this open, of course, to the public at all times when we're operating on club nights, and we have annual shows at least twice and sometimes 3 times a year.
What's the club most proud of, would you say?
Well, I think it's I think the overall effect, and I think this is a product of good track work built by the club members, all hand-laid rail, all custom-made, scratch-built turnouts, good scenery, good structures. I think an imaginative track plan that's very believable, that when the viewer comes in and looks at our layout, I think one of the common comments is, gee, this looks like the real thing.
And it does.
And I think that this is what we strove to achieve, and I think to some extent we managed to bring it off.
What do you get out of the hobby? What's the motivation for you?
It's my tranquilizer, personally. It's a tremendous relaxation. It's a constant challenge, and yet it's always changing. You can finish one project and move to the next and have a new challenge.
Thanks for the visit, Logan. I expected to see the great structures, but the animation of the coal tipple was a surprise.
Well, we're glad you could be here, Alan. We've enjoyed it very much, and we'll point out that things are up to date here in Severna Park because we, too, have our television.
Thanks. Our 6 featured layouts show the hobby's diversity. These model railroads are very personal creations that can help us understand the appeal of our hobby. For Rick Shoup and his Tuesday night choir boys, friendship and fun are the important elements of the Atlantic and Western. Rick and Linda Spano enjoy special effects with their animation and scenery, but they also want the layout to reflect the world around them. Like many Colorado railroads, the Denver and Western exists to serve the mines. However, most of Gordon North's layout is scenic for open running and very little switching. Operation and realistic track arrangements are 2 subjects that excite John Armstrong, so he favors grades that require some real work for his locomotives. The Pin Creek Valley is a way for Sam Powell to express himself. He's not a detail hound anymore. Now he seeks to create an artistic impression of a railroad. Duplication of prototype structures is a real specialty at the Severna Park Model Railroad Club. The scenes are selectively compressed, but the buildings are not. All of us hope you enjoyed Model Railroader Video Layout Tour number 4.
Wayne Wesolowski, Master Builder. Here's his card.
Building Model Railroad Wood Structures with Wayne Wesolowski. Presented by Model Railroader Magazine.
How do we know what kind of work he does? Well, here's a sample of what he did upstate. He built the whole town.
Wayne will show you and the citizens of Marengo all about wood and wood kits. You'll learn tricks and techniques for building craftsman wood kits as well as scratch-built structures. Buildings identify the geographic location and purpose of our railroads. Structures do make a difference. They're part of the setting or theme for our railroads.
Let's hire Wayne. He sure makes his buildings look real and weathered.
This is going to be fun and a challenge, too. I think I'll use that vacant area out there for the new depot. I've selected Campbell's Skull Valley kit for our depot because it's very similar to the 130-year-old depot at the Illinois Railway Museum. It'll be the beginning of Marengo's new depot. These pictures show the depot's classic wood design, operator area, board and batten siding, and E-bracing that make it so typical of rural stations. I especially like it because it's neat and old, and that's how we'll build it. Even though it was built in 1852, it's still serving the railroad public today.
Wayne Wesolowski, master builder, will soon solve another building problem for a town and make the layout safe for model trains and their passengers.
Wood is really a great modeling material that can be used for a lot more than building structures. You know, I could build a baggage car up at that end or the caboose at this end. You know, this car is really nothing more than a structure on wheels. And the wainscoting on our depot is very similar to the scribe sheetwood on the caboose. So the tools, techniques, and methods that we use for building wood can apply to many other models. Come on, let's go on down to the wood shop and talk about wood as a modeling material.
What better place to learn about prototype wood construction than a carpenter shop?
Our models should look like the prototype. So it's important that we know something about joints and prototype construction. This is Dick Cecil, a model railroader who's active in carpentry and home repair. You know, Dick, the very best models, the prize winners, are those that follow prototype construction closely. Can you give us some help with some common prototype joints?
The most common joint in carpentry is the butt joint, simply joining two pieces of wood together and fastening them with nails in this manner.
You know, unfortunately, we don't have scale nails to put our model butt joints together. But I do have a suggestion to make your model butt joints stronger. If we take the piece of material we're going to join and apply a single coat of glue to the end, allow the glue to dry and soak into the wood, sealing the end fibers. Apply a second coat of glue and then join the piece as we normally would. The first coat seals the end of the wood and provides for a much stronger joint that won't come apart.
For motion and stability, Wayne, best joint to use is probably the lap joint, done simply by putting grooves into two pieces of wood and joining them in this manner.
I used a lap joint on a model of a yard office, the garage doors in a yard office, so that the pieces would line up very correctly and properly.
Not as common, but considerably more stable, is the mortise and tenon joint. The mortise, the holes, the tenon, the cut down portions of the wood here, are joined in this manner.
It's very difficult to tell what kind of joint we actually have at the end of the car. But I think this photograph clearly shows that the Quincy Company has used mortise and tenon joints all along the end sill for these cars. Now, modelers seldom go this far, but I do have a suggestion to simulate that kind of joint. If we were to be building a car or even a structure, you can take, say, the side sill. Using an X-Acto knife and a file, carve out a section of the side sill. With the end sill, also carve out a notch in a section. We can fit the end and side sills together, forming a very tight joint, simulating the mortise and tenon. If you want a simpler version of the same joint, we can simply take a file, notch out the end of the end sill, and one of the intermediate sills can lock in place.
Good models often are made board by board, following prototype framing practices.
As you can see here, we've got these studs, which have been butt jointed. We have a window sill, various fire stops in the wall, joined together. And then on the other side, in this instance, we have simple wood sheathing, which has been nailed to the studs. Normally, we'd have these boards end on a 2x4, certainly never between them.
Now, another type of joint that I use, especially in modeling work, is what I call a press-fit joint. If we're going to put a piece of trim between two other sections of trim, the prototype would probably cut the piece straight, like this on either end, and fit it in the joint location. For model work, we don't have to be quite that accurate, but yet it's very difficult to make that small cut. So what I do is take the piece of model trim material and cut a very sharp angle on the end. This is pressed in one place and then fitted or snapped in place. This allows you a lot of air, but gives a very tight joint. Let's do this on the model. I can take my X-Acto knife, find the location where I'd like to place it, and then actually cut it back at a rather sharp angle. Let's see that this will again press and snap in place so that the joint is almost invisible. By cutting back we can avoid the problem of cutting it too long or cutting it too short. Have a lot of area there, but yet it makes an exceptionally tight joint. Okay, Dick, thank you very much for your help. I think we'll go on now and select our materials.
Prototype wood is divided into various quality grades. We don't have any such guidelines for model wood, so we must look for quality ourselves. Wayne, how can we find quality wood? Do we have to cut it ourselves?
No, Alan, it really isn't practical for most of us to cut our own wood, even those of us that do a lot of scratch building. In selecting a kit, check the wood for saw swirls, like this. Also be careful of wood that shows an excessive amount of fuzz. You'll spend a lot of time sanding and cleaning these parts up. This is a good piece of wood. The dimensions are crisp, clear, no saw swirls, nice and smooth. Kit material that contains die-cut parts should have sharp and crisply cut lines. Plastic castings should have thin cross-sections, not like this, and the casting shouldn't be warped. This is a good plastic casting. The plastic casting should also be easily removed from the sprue. Metal castings should show very little flash. The part should come easily apart, not like these. My dad bought this casting in the late 1940s. For its time, it was a good casting of a ladder. See how far we've come. Look at this metal casting. Clean, sharp. The parting line is almost invisible. These are the kind of castings your kit should supply.
What about the plans, Wayne?
They should be well organized with a scale drawing, a good scale drawing. An exploded view is also very useful, and it's good to have a picture of the finished model. If you have plans that have the instructions on one side and a drawing on the other side, it's a good idea to make a photocopy of the instructions so that you don't have to continuously flip back and forth while you're building the kit.
What else do you look for in a kit?
Several things. First, the material should be packaged in well-organized, separate containers for the various sub-assemblies. I also look for price and value. How complex is the kit for the price? Are the pieces pre-cut? Are the castings good? One of the most important aspects in selecting a kit is your level of interest. Do you really want that model on your layout? Does it fit in with your railroad motif? Alan, I know a little love and enthusiasm goes a long way in deciding whether I buy and build a kit. Another way to evaluate kits is get to know your local hobby dealer. They can help you in selecting a kit that's not beyond your ability, but will give you a real challenge.
This is a station you're going to build?
Yes, this is Campbell's Skull Valley Station kit. During our project, we'll talk about your workshop. We'll talk about cutting, gluing, painting, assembling, and detailing the Skull Valley kit.
Any place in your home can be your work area. It doesn't have to be fancy. What's important are the lighting and work surface if you want to do quality work. What are the most important features you should consider in setting up a work area at home?
Alan, it's not at all that complex as most people may think. Probably the first feature to worry about is the lighting. Shadows tend to hide details and also tend to hide your mistakes. So you need a couple of lamps like this. I suggest 2, and maybe a light over the top. The other important aspect is to worry about what kind of lighting you have over the layout. If the layout has fluorescent lighting, you need fluorescent here. If it's incandescent, incandescent here. Second aspect is the work surface. You don't want a rough surface, but neither do you want a smooth surface that has grain in it. As the knife breaks through, it'll follow the grain and not give you a straight cut. Masonite or press board is the kind of thing you need.
Wayne, I notice you've got several different kinds of knives. Why so many?
Well, there really aren't that many. My basic tool is the X-Acto knife with interchangeable blades. 11 for sharp corners, 16 for rough cuts. You should have many around, so you always have a sharp knife. Single-edged razor blades are useful, too. They're inexpensive, and you can throw them away as often as you want. A compass knife with a blade that fits is good for cutting circles. If you have strip wood to cut, you can use a back saw with a miter box. If the kit calls for cutting many pieces of wood, something like the chopper, the Northwest Shortline chopper is useful. You can just place the wood in place and cut away, reproducing the same size. Let's talk a little bit about the basics of cutting.
Okay.
You need some kind of a straight edge. It should be metal, not wood or plastic, so that the knife doesn't cut into it and not give you a straight line. Let's say that we're going to cut this section from our kit. I'm going to cut out the window. I'm going to lay the straight edge down. And I need to mark the corners of the window, so I'll use a small drill to drill out each of the corners. That gives me a place to start and stop. Otherwise, the knife can go past. Also, the straight edge should cover the piece that I want to protect, not the piece that I'm going to throw away. So we'll put the straight edge in place, and then several light strokes rather than hard strokes. We'll do the cutting, and we can pop our piece out. You'll also need a good scale rule, something like this, and a caliper if you want to be exceptionally accurate. This is my conscience.
Okay.
It's not hard to pick up a 2x4.
No, it's not.
All right, that's no problem at all. Scale 2x4, that's
another thing.
Heck of a lot harder.
Yeah.
What you need are tweezers. Tweezers are extensions of your hand. They come in all different varieties, types, sizes, hemostats like this. The important aspect, though, is what's the pressure? How hard is it? If it's too hard to push the tweezers together, your hand will shake, even though it may be imperceptible. The last thing that we need are some kinds of clamps. I have a whole collection of clamps here, but probably the simplest and cheapest are simple clothespins. I can take a clothespin and grind a clothespin to whatever contour I want, sharp contour, and that'll clamp right onto the model for the project that I'm working with. The next thing we need to do is to look at finishing the surface of wood.
Preparing the wood is the first step to a realistic finish. But before you grab sandpaper and brush, Wayne has some tips.
Boy, that stuff's a lot heavier than what we use. Take a look at these two pieces of wood. An old piece with a rough texture, a new piece with a smooth texture.